Today we just have a short reflection on a couple of verses from Luke 18, verses 15 to 17. People were also bringing babies to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. When the disciples saw this, they rebuked them. But Jesus called the children to him and said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." So when I was a teenager and I read this passage for the first time, I wondered why Jesus says so clearly that to enter the kingdom of heaven you must be like a child. When I was a teenager, the very last thing that I wanted to do was go back to being a child. All I wanted to do was to grow up. When I was a teenager, it seemed like adults had everything sussed. But as I get older and become more of an adult, I'm 21, so not quite there yet, I wish I could tell the younger me just how wrong I was. But more than this, as I've grown and worked with children in and out of the church over the past 6 years, I'm now starting to understand exactly what Jesus meant. Children seem to have a way of being incredibly non-judgmental with their kindness. Their generosity and their love, they're so non-judgmental with it. If it's needed, they'll give it. It's a beautiful thing to watch, and the more times I see it happen, the more I'm convinced that this is what Jesus was talking about in this passage. Let me tell you an example of just one of the many times I've experienced the astoundingly non-judgmental generosity of children. A couple of years ago, I worked in a church in North London. It was quite a rough area, but one of the most beautiful communities that I've ever had the privilege to be a part of. I led an after-school club in the church I worked in for the children who were about the ages of 7 to 11 years old. It was madness, but it was incredibly rewarding. Near to the end of each session, the kids were split into small groups so that they could ask questions about the session that we'd just done and pray about anything that they liked. My group every single week was a group of 7 to 8-year-olds, and they were mostly boys, and they were insane. There was one little boy though, the youngest in the whole club, a tiny boy who was a bit of a monkey, but he was very sweet. He looked really serious for a moment when I asked what he wanted to pray for. Then he looked at me and he said, "There are 2 boys at school who are bullying me. They're always mean to me." So I said, "Do you want to pray that they will stop being mean to you and that they'll leave you alone?" At this, the little boy said very clearly, "No, I want to pray for them. I think they aren't very happy. I think they must be really sad to be hurting people. Can we please pray for them?" Now, I won't lie, this made me choke up a little bit, and I had to remind myself that it would be very unprofessional to start weeping in front of the children I was supposed to be in charge of. So I furiously blinked away the tears and helped this little boy to pray his profoundly beautiful prayer for those 2 boys in his class. I don't know what happened in the end of this story, but I won't forget the peace that radiated from that little boy when we finished praying. And I won't forget the astounding levels of generosity that that little boy possessed. An incredible level of kindness that I wouldn't have even guessed could be part of anyone's brain. I actually think that was the day that I started to understand the depth of what Jesus was talking about in this passage. For a child, generosity, love, and kindness is so natural, so intrinsically a part of their nature. In my experience, even the wildest, craziest child finds it easy to be generous with their kindness. What happens that it goes from being a natural part of childhood to something that we actively have to remember as adults? I think this is why God is calling us to be like little children. And as Jesus is calling us to be like children, to enter the kingdom of heaven, try starting with the simple, profound, and glorious act of being generous with your kindness.